Welcome to Parliament House. My name is Michael Keating. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Inside Canberra. I'm talking today with Michelle Grattan, the political correspondent for The Conversation, and we're discussing the 2014 Year in Review in federal politics. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Michael.
It's been a ragged year for the Abbott government. Where have things gone wrong?
Look, it's had many problems, but I think we can say overarching problems have been breaching trust, not keeping election promises, flouting election promises quite dramatically, and secondly, completely misjudging the budget, bringing in a whole lot of measures that hit people, that were unexpected, that the government hadn't prepared the ground for. And ever since the budget, the government has absolutely tanked in the polls. It's failed to get a number of key measures through, and things have just got worse and worse. Also, I think internally we've seen signs of division. A number of ministers are quite agitated about the centralisation of control in the Prime Minister's office, and there's also a lot of jockeying between some senior members of the ministry. And to add to all this, or as part of all this, Treasurer Joe Hockey has really had a shocker of a year. He's had the budget problems, and he's also had a lot of criticism by his colleagues, by the commentators, of his failure to sell the government's message properly.
We've seen a lot of Barnacle Removal in the last week or so, most notably the change to the co-payment and the promise to further the paid parental leave scheme. Will this be enough to change the Abbott government's fortunes?
I don't think so. These are things that should have been done some time ago. To leave them till just before Christmas, when the electorate's not concentrating so much anyway, I think is a bad strategic decision. But still, at least the government now has more of a chance of getting its policy on Medicare through the Senate or implemented. Some of it will be by regulation, which makes it a bit more difficult for the Senate to take apart. The higher education changes are still in limbo. They were defeated by the Senate last week, and they'll come back early in the new year. And as for the paid parental leave scheme, well, we know that it's going to be reshaped, but what we don't know is exactly the form of that reshaping. Some of the money will be taken and put into childcare, which is a sensible decision, which was recommended by the Productivity Commission and which should have been done a long time ago.
The budget update comes next week. The numbers are certain to be bad. How is this going to affect the Abbott government?
Well, of course, the government's central message has been repairing the budget. And what this budget update is going to show is that this task has got harder, that the idea of getting the budget back into some sort of balance by around 2017-18 is really out the window. There'll be a downgrading of revenue forecasts because there's been a fall in iron ore prices in particular, and there's been lower wage growth than had been predicted. Now, we saw this continually happen under Labor, and the coalition in those days was totally unsympathetic. It just said, well, it's all the government's fault. So it won't get much joy from Labor for its own problems, and I think that this budget update will just further undermine the government's credibility on the economic front and show that it's got a really uphill battle ahead.
Bill Shorten has had an easier than expected year. How has he performed?
I think he's performed quite well, but as you say, it has been unexpectedly easy for him to make his points because the government has been doing badly. I think as we go into next year, let alone the third year of the cycle, there'll be a lot more attention on what Bill Shorten would present if he were in government, attention on him as an alternative Prime Minister, and therefore he will have to be particularly credible. He'll have to start to build positive policies, and it will be a challenge for him to balance the positives and the negatives.
There has been a lot of speculation about a reshuffle early next year. Can we expect this, and is this an opportunity or a risk for Tony Abbott?
Whether there'll be a reshuffle depends on what happens with Arthur Sinodinos. He stood aside as Assistant Treasurer because he was giving evidence to ICAC, and depending on the reports from ICAC, his position will be clarified, whether he goes back as Assistant Treasurer, whether he has another position in the ministry, or whether he has to be dropped from the ministry. Now, if that all triggers a reshuffle, then for Tony Abbott it is both an opportunity and a risk. And I think as things stand, with the pressure on the Prime Minister, it has become more of a risk than an opportunity, because he would like to have a limited reshuffle. He'd prefer to have no reshuffle at all at this point, but if he has to have one, he'd like it to be minimalist. And yet, if he doesn't do some substantial things, for example, promoting women and also bringing in some backbench talent and making a few moves, and of course the pressure is on Defence Minister David Johnson when you talk about moves, then I think the critics will really go to town on the Prime Minister. So it'll be an interesting test of him if there is that reshuffle.
Thank you, Michelle. That's it for Inside Canberra this year. We'll be back with you in February 2015 when the Parliament resumes. I'd like to thank you for reading Inside Canberra, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.